Hi, everyone. I'm Lana Zach. The 152nd annual Belmont Stakes is set to take place this Saturday. The horse racing event typically comes after the Kentucky Derby and the Preakness Stakes. However, this year it will kick off the series of contests for what's known as the Triple Crown. Due to the pandemic, there will be no audience in the stands, however. And so for more on this and the horse racing industry in general, I'm going to bring in John Cherwa. He's a special contributor to the Los Angeles Times. So good to have you with us, John. The endurance course at the Belmont Stakes was shortened this year. Why is that, and why the whole change, putting it in front of the two other contests?
Well, that's a good question because the Belmont was always known as the mile-and-a-half race, the really long race. But horses have not trained up to it like they would have normally. Normally, in the first part of May, they would have gone a mile and a quarter, and then a mile and 3/16 at the Preakness, and then 3 weeks later, the Belmont at a mile and a half. But there's really no horse that's done more than a mile and an eighth, and they can't go a mile and a half at this point in their career. And the reason this sort of set up at this time was because Churchill just decided, hey, we're doing September 5th. The rest of you figure it out on your own. And since, frankly, Belmont can't really run too much later than they do because Saratoga's coming up, this was basically the only time they could run it.
And John, spectators are not allowed at the races during the pandemic. So what kind of impact might this have on the industry if it really continues for the long term?
Well, I think eventually, obviously, once we get a vaccine, spectators will be allowed back. As for the horses, they will not hear the noise. And that is actually kind of a positive rather than a negative, because say you're at the Kentucky Derby with 150,000 people or the Belmont with 90,000 people, when you come around the home stretch and you hit that wall of noise, that can be somewhat of an impediment. So you won't have to deal about that. Obviously, racetracks are going to lose the beverage and the drinks and all those kind of things that help fuel their business. But on the other hand, they're not having to pay all these employees. So it's kind of a trade-off where, the employees lose, the tracks don't lose quite as much.
So I'll confess, John, I am not a big horse racing aficionado. I do like the Derby hats and the mint juleps at the parties that I go to. But for somebody that does care about this, what does it mean that the Belmont Stakes is coming back this weekend?
Well, I think it's just one more sign of normalcy that we're getting back to, the way it used to be, although it's really not in any way the way it used to be. So that's what's important to the industry. These past couple of weeks, more tracks have opened because a lot of tracks, such as Santa Anita, which is the track that I mostly cover in Southern California, was closed for, a month and a half. The New York tracks were closed for a long time also. So it's more symbolic of normalcy than it is really anything else.
Since you brought up Santa Anita, I wanted to ask you about that. That track has faced a lot of scrutiny in recent years over those horse deaths. And most recently, the track was scrutinized over coronavirus testing. What more can you tell us about this? And has there been any other deaths since the track reopened?
Well, right now the track is at 15 deaths since December 26th. Last year at this point, they were at 30. So it is a reduction, obviously, in half, but they've also had fewer races. But a lot of the deaths occur during morning training. So that's, we're going from 81 racing cars last year to about 62 this year. But it seems like they have their problems sorted out. But I think what's really interesting is there's something going on at Belmont. Belmont has had, I think, 7 deaths between training or racing deaths between May 6th and May 31st. And then they've had like at least another 3, which is really very high because New York tracks are known as being pretty safe. But I don't think this is necessarily percolated out into the general public at the problems they're having in New York right now. Santa Anita, it seems to have subsided a lot.
Mm-hmm. And I know that before the pandemic, there were some big headlines about some of those horse deaths, as you mentioned, both at Belmont now and as well at Santa Anita. There were some questions about the future of horse racing. Where does that stand now?
Well, horse racing is really working hard to sort of reinvent itself. Although the factions within the sport just, maybe make that impossible, because there's a thing in Congress called the Horse Racing Integrity Act, which would standardize medication and testing and all those sorts of things across the country. Okay, on the surface, sounds like a good idea. The Stronach Group, which owns a lot of tracks, is in favor of it. NYRA, which is New York, in favor of it. Churchill Downs, not in favor of it. And when you realize that, the industry can't even get together on testing and, common rules, it's really tough. Now, in California, this, in a bizarre way, kind of worked in their favor because of the COVID-19 pandemic. There really was no opportunity for people to get ballots on a signature or signatures on a ballot to have an initiative to have horse racing banned in California. So that kind of, in a bizarre sort of way, worked in their favor.
Interesting. I know that there was also another issue with jockeys and some questions about their wages, their treatment, et cetera. Where does that stand now?
Well, there's always issues about backstretch workers and things like that. Not so much the jockeys. New York actually has been more at the epicenter of that than Southern California. But it's a constantly evolving process because these people, for the most part, do not have insurance. Although most of the tracks have backstretch, medical centers. So, these are the things that just go on with a business that has been around for a long time, and is its time past? I don't know, but certainly some of the recent problems have been brought to the front, and horse racing is working really hard on trying to fix them.
Okay, John Cherwa, thank you for joining us.
You bet.